Hello and welcome. If you have a CNC router, you've probably discovered early on that it's not difficult to drop something basic and start cutting it out. But as you look at more intricate projects, there's a lot more pitfalls to run into. This project here is my first attempt at something a lot more involved, as I'm going to do a piece of wall art that's going to go over the couch in our living room that I just remodeled. I was looking for a tree of life type of setup and found this file on Etsy. It's a fantastic way to start. $2.24. I had a perfect vector file to start with. Bringing it into VCarve, the first thing I did was to redraw the borders just to make sure everything was perfectly straight and to the width of frame that I wanted and evenly spaced. Then I cleaned up the files a little bit and flushed out one side on each one and left a little bit hanging over on the other side just to make sure I could trim it for a tight fit later. Then starting with the simplest panel, I brought it into its own file so that I could rotate it and nest the parts together the way I wanted. I have the grain of the board running left to right here, and I want the grain to follow branches as much as possible. It's obviously not going to do that completely, but on every panel I'm going to run the grain as much as I can along each section versus just having it crossways or vertical. My first set of toolpaths just had a 1/4 inch bit followed by an 1/8 inch bit and thought that would give me a pretty clean cut. However, once I started running the file, I had a lot of those skinny sections breaking off, so I had to go back and figure out what I could improve. First thing I did was within the files themselves. I went and looked for areas that were overly thin. And using the node editing, I stretched and recurved and moved things around. Very easy to do in this case because it's a free-form object. Not so easy if you have something that's very uniform or a particular size. But some of the tips from this video will still apply as you lay out the project and find things to look for ahead of time that might be issues. I made sure to get all my changes back into this main file so that if I wanted to cut this project again at a different size, I can scale the entire thing and then create my cut files again. I saved one of the old vectors here so that I could show the difference as I added material and made sure things were wide enough so that they were going to be strong enough, and also looking to make sure that a bit could get in through here. If I had an area where it was too thin to functionally machine, then I would just spread that out. Aside from the changes to the file itself to make sure areas were a little thicker, I then mainly focused on the tool paths. I made a couple decisions here. I was going to run my first roughing pass with a 1/4 inch bit with an offset of 55 thousandths in this case. And that was driven by deciding to do the finishing pass with a tapered bit. Using a tapered bit would let me get into the corners a little bit tighter. It is also going to leave a wider cross section at the bottom for a little more strength. And the 55 thousandths because I drew it up with my 0.52 material thickness and a 6-degree taper on the bit. And I want my first pass to be outside of here, so I don't want to come in on the taper. If I had offset something like 30 thousandths, I would end up with a line around the entire project on the side that I would need to sand off. So I made sure that I was out far enough to clear the taper bit that was going to come at the end. Running the roughing pass with an offset also left more cross section, more strength everywhere when I was doing the heaviest material removal. One of the issues with these thin parts is that the router bit can cause it to chatter. That's what led to some of the breakage also. As the bit spins and digs into the wood, it's going to cause the wood to deflect. And you've got a nice thick piece with a lot of stock left, it's not going to have any appreciable effect. But when you've got a thinner piece, as the cutting edge comes around and pushes on the wood, it's going to deflect a little bit and even cause a vibration. My next pass was with a tapered ball nose with an 1/8 inch tip, and I'm leaving 10 thousandths for a final cleanup pass just to try to get a better surface finish at the end. And my final pass here is just full depth with a very thin 16th inch tip tapered ball nose, so that I can just come around and clean up the corners and skim off that last 10 thousandths for hopefully a nice smooth surface finish. As soon as I started running attempt number 2, I had the bit running off the wood and I had to stop and figure out why. As I had been looking at the entire thing and trying to figure out how to place the material and machine it, I had messed around with offsetting the start point for the files and didn't realize I left this radio button checked. So this is a dangerous button. What happened is, even though my 00 was set here with that offset enabled, as soon as I hit go on the file, it went to the right 2 inches and down 2 inches and started there. Because this was a free-form shape, I was able to use CA glue to add some material in the problem spots and then rerun the first file to just get that initial cut on those 3 places. And the result turned out quite well. Although I'm going to have a little bit of a line where the material changes, it's not going to really show in the final product. I did still have some breakage on this second attempt though, so I had to go back and rethink it once again. This is where I started to really think about the vibrations that set up in these pieces, and I realized I didn't have nearly enough tabs. If you're used to putting in just enough tabs like I was, you have to rethink it on something like this. I had a lot of these very thin areas that weren't supported And once this gets cut loose here, we've got very little strength to resist the force of the bit that's pushing sideways on the wood, especially on these ones that run perpendicular to the grain. My grain is running crossways here, and these very short fibers have very little strength to them. I also realized I had some parts nested too closely together here. When this 1/4 inch pass comes through here, there's very little left. And over here, when these 1/4 inch roughing passes run, they're going to overlap and there's going to be nothing left in here, which takes away the strength and also takes away some of the vibration damping. This would have been the next panel to run, but initially I had all these parts nested much closer together, and I had glued up a piece of walnut that was going to just barely cover it. So along with deciding I needed to have a little more material on the outsides to maintain strength, I went back and resized the material I'm going to need for this piece and spread things out so that I have some wood left in between and more strength to support all these little bits that stick out and to help quell the vibrations. So this is the next one I'm going to run. My piece is just a little bit short up here that I have glued up, so I'm going to add a block on just to catch that, and applying all the things I've learned on the tool paths, and now I have tabs on everything. It's going to require a lot of cleanup at the end, but it should take away hopefully all the breakage. If I'm lucky, it should take a lot of the vibration out. So all these thin pieces are supported way out at the ends now, instead of some of them that I had back and they were sticking out. And then not only at the end, but any longer when I've got tabs back further too, just to keep this tied into the bigger piece of wood and to try to keep it from moving and vibrating as the bit comes past it. And as I thought about the profile path using a tapered bit, I realized there might be one thing that could cause an issue, and that's if V-carve didn't adapt for the taper. You can see here, every time I leave a tab with a tapered bit, when the bit comes by and rises up, because of the taper, it comes away from the wall, and I was hoping that the program would be smart enough to slide the bit over to compensate, skin off the tab, and move back and drop down again, but they don't have it set up that way. It should have the intelligence for it, since we do V-carving, and it knows the width of the bit at every point based on depth of the bit, so it's already built into the software. They just haven't applied it here. So I may see if I can find a contact for V-carve to send in a suggestion here, something that could be improved in the future. The way I worked around it right now is I created one final tool path. That's the same thing as the previous one with the 16th inch tapered ball mill, except that I set the depth to right just above the tabs. So it's going to come through here and skin off everything above the tabs. We'll see that if I run this one. It came around, and everywhere that we had these bits of extra material on the walls, I've got it running just above the tab, so I'll have a lot less cleanup to do at the end. If you remember me saying there's a lot of pitfalls, I'm about to run into another one right here. I know I had tightened this bit enough, but I must have not inserted it enough into the collet because it came loose. I thought the bit had broken off at first, even though I was cutting with a pretty light load, so I was lucky that I just had to reinstall the bit. However, my old shopbot isn't a fan of being stopped in the middle of a file. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. After having to reboot both the router and the laptop, I thought I was back to the same 0 point, but when I restarted the file, I was offset down and over, which caused the file to run off the end of the board on the other side, and I had to stop and add a piece of material here and rerun the first file. Up on top here is the block I said I was going to add because this piece of walnut was glued up for a different set of branches. And in order to change what I was going to run on it, I had to add a little material. So this is the first of the tapered tool paths running with the 1/8 inch ball nose. And after running the final 16th inch ball nose pass, you can see the tabs I was talking about in V-carve, where the tapered bit lifted up, which made it narrower as it ran across the tab location, then dropped back down. And running my final tool path with the same bit and the same path and just running it just above the tab height is going to clean that up quite nicely. And what I got this time around, aside from the one branch that I will just add into one of the other files to get it remachined, was pretty much a perfect cut. There was a couple of tips where there's just a little bit of fibers broken out. Other than that, there's no breakage anywhere on any of the small parts. Here's the first panel I've got mostly finished. I hadn't glued it together yet. I was making sure that the colors work. It's particular to our house because the dark brown is what I've painted all the new trim and baseboards, and the background color is a little bit lighter than what's in this room, and it's the paint that's from around the corner in the hallway. So it's going to all tie together with our particular color scheme. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like or leave a comment if there's something that you would have done differently with the toolpaths or some other tips and tricks that might help somebody else or myself. I'm going to have another video covering this project by itself, along with a dust collection upgrade I just finished that includes this contraption, including the acrylic work for the pickup over the table saw. So if you want to see those, check back or consider subscribing, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.